My name is Diana Synadinos, and I am a seamstress. And I learned how to sew from my mother when I was a little girl. I didn't grow up in the Greek culture. I grew up in Ohio, and I was a farm girl. But one time I met a young man from Greece, and he swept me off my feet, and I went to Greece to visit it. And it exposed me to a fabulous culture that I knew nothing about. But because mother had taught me how to sew, and after I saw these collections of costumes in the museums in Greece, it inspired me to see if I could even copy one. So I started with the old look, which would be ancient. This would be an example of an ancient costume. Sewing machines were not invented yet, so everything was done by hand. Stitching of all kinds, stretch stitching and beautiful embroidery work. And many of these symbols that you will see are repeated throughout Greece, even in plaster or in embroidery. And so there are names for each of these particular styles. And it quickly identifies where they are from. These are typically Greek designs. And every once in a while, when I'm shopping in modern stores, I'll see a button and it will have a Greek symbol on the little brass button. And I'm surprised that here in Columbus, Ohio, I could find even modern things that will still have a pattern on it. Every family that has a little girl in Greece, they want to raise her up to be a worthy bride. And so from the time she is little, her father is already thinking about her wedding day. And so you train the little girl from her mother, who will be training her, in how to be a good homemaker and how to make a good home. And also she will be the mother of the children that will be coming. And so there are certain colors and certain arrangements in jewelry and certain fashions that all play into this. And each area of Greece has a distinct look. And I have studied this quite a bit, and I found it very interesting. We don't do that in modern countries. We get all excited about when we have a daughter coming home from college or something, and Mom, I've met the boy of my dreams. And then we start thinking about marriage. But that's not the way it is in Greece. As soon as you have a little girl, you start training her in being a good homemaker and a housekeeper and a good mother. And it is displayed in the way she is dressed. And each region has its own distinctive look. So we were showing this one because everybody stops to look at it when they look at the display. You can see red is very popular, and so is blue, and so is jewelry. And so the girl will be adorned with, this is part of her prika. A prika is your the money that you're going to receive as you go into your marriage. And so you'll see it worked in as jewelry, but that will become spendable cash once the girl is married. And then they need to find ways to adorn the home or to do anything where you need money. She's already coming in with money. Her hair. It's considered a woman's glory is to have long hair. And some of these gals let their hair grow quite long. And to beautify it, they'll work yarn or pretty ribbon into it. And that's typical of this part of Macedonia, which is northern Greece. This is a very interesting combination. It is called an Evzon costume, and it was worn by the guerrilla fighters in Greece in the 1800s who were in the mountainous areas where they were under attack. And it's very unusual looking, but it's unique. As far as we know in our history of studying costume, this is known to the Greeks. These were guerrilla fighters who were fierce and who wanted to triumph over the advancement of enemies. And so these strange looking things are actually sleeves. And so these guys were guerrilla fighters in the mountains, and the nights could be bitter cold. And when they had to hunker down, they would go down just to stay warm. That's why the skirt is so full, because it serves as like a little warm blanket kind of around their crouched knees. This is a fustanella. That's the name of this costume. This is a fusta. This has 400 pieces in it. And if you get up close, you can see that they're sort of pie wedge shaped. They're wide at the bottom and they taper up to the waist like this. But with 400 pieces, it can go around you more than once. But these are looked on as something to help them stay warm at night. They didn't have the luxury of having a place where they could go back after battle, where they could go to a barracks or something to sleep. They were out in the cold air. This is unique to Greece. I've not seen this in other costume books from other countries. But you got to do what you got to do. When you're on a mountain and it's bitter cold, you got to find a way to stay warm. So this design has come out in the 1800s, and this is called a fustanella. Fusta means skirt. The fustanella is the entire ensemble, and it was worn during the guerrilla fighting in the 1800s in Greece. Even into the 1900s, by the way, there were still guerrilla fighters in southern Greece. The headdress is called a fesi, F-E-S-I. Now, when we see this in history books, oftentimes it's called a fez, F-E-Z. But the Greeks have their own word for it. It's made of heavy wool. It sits tight on the head, and then the tassel that hangs down. Now, some people have told me that every thread that's in the tassel represents the 400 years that Greece was occupied by the Turks. And so that's why these tassels are so thick and so much. And so this is, when you see this ensemble, you know it was a guerrilla fighter. And the waistband, I'll show it here, is cotton. It goes around 2 or 3 times. It's about that wide, a long strip of cotton and wool. It's woven. And it just kind of ties in a big knot in the front, and the fringe hangs down in the front. And here's a little of it you can kind of see in the corner over here. But we like to show the back side because it's so full of the ornamentation of all of the embroidery. It's wool yarn woven onto woolen fabric. These designs are done by tailors who specifically design the clothes for the army. And this is a fustanella. This is called a tsarouchi. It's a heavy leather boot, they call it, worn by the guerrilla fighters as they were running up and down the rough mountainsides. And in order to cover up the pointy toe, because that's pretty much what the men of that era were wearing all throughout southern Europe. They wore this kind of a pointy-toed shoe. You see it in children's storybooks with Aladdin. With his lamp, he would wear a pair of shoes that looked like this, and they came up to a point. The Greeks did not like the point on the toe because it reminded them of the Turks, and they didn't want to be thought of as being Turks. And so they hid that pointy toe with this big puffball. This is called, well, the whole thing is called a tsarouchi, and then this big puffball is on the front, and that's to hide the evidence of their oppressor. Well, this young girl is from an island called Carpathos. We can see here, as we've been talking about, how young girls are prepared for marriage. And you can see that this little girl is loaded with plenty of gold coins and money that her father has set aside for her, so that when she's married, there will be money to outfit the home and for her to have a lovely ensemble when she gets married. They love bright colors in Carpathos. So here are all of the gold coins. And so the father is very cautious that she finds a handsome, not just a handsome, but a good groom. Because we don't want them to be too greedy, because look at how rich this girl's going to be when it's time for her to be married. Flowers are very popular as part of the headdress. And of course, Greece has a wonderful climate. If you look out here, look what she's been doing. She's been picking grapes. They have vineyards just about all over in Greece, and the islands are no exception. So she's a daughter of a vintner, and they have great grape. They have a grape arbor. And so here she is. Now, she has here this thing here. Can you imagine what this must be for? You never saw this in America, but it's a shepherd's crook. Now, she's a little girl, so this shepherd's crook is kind of small because she's short. Why is it shaped like that? It's because when you're following the sheep and they're running ahead of you, and you're trying to bust up or break up all of the bunching together of the lambs, you just reach it under the back leg and you give a little yank, and this catches the hind leg and it kind of hobbles the lamb and it can't get away. And then you can kind of walk up to it and pick up the lamb and hold it. Or just get it out of the way of all the other lambs that are running around. But this is a crook, a shepherd's crook. And I have seen these all over the Peloponnese, bigger ones for men who are shepherding large groups of sheep. And they have these. So it's called a klitsa, K-L-I-T-S-A. So this is a young one for this little girl. Not that she's a shepherd, but I'll bet she's unafraid, because those rural kids who grew up around animals are very unafraid. And this it's really a water jug. Probably started as a wine jug, but after you use up the wine, the glass jug is still very important. There's not a lot of these floating around, and so each family wants to have plenty of these glass jugs, because that's where your water supply is coming. You go down to the springs and you hold this under the waterfall and fill it up, and you bring several of them back to the house, so you have household water. It's drinkable, and it's also used for just any need you have for water. But as you can see, you could use one of these up in a hurry. So that's why a lot of families in the villages have a lot of these kind of jugs. But this wicker on the outside helps the water to stay cool. So these are beautiful. And so you often see young girls or women or men coming down the pathways going to the waterfalls, and they'll stand there and fill these jugs. I have taken pictures of them at the waterfalls, and it's just such a nice piece of life in the village. People see this in the exhibit and they often ask, what in the world is that for? Because it can't be something that holds water, because all of these cutouts would, everything would leak out. This is called a sorotiri, which means sieve. So you're thinking, yeah, so how does that work? Well, when you're boiling a big pot of hot water and you're putting the spaghetti in to get it to soften, after a while you don't need the water. So you clamp this over the top of the open pot. Don't leave your hand right here, because when you tip the pot over to let all the hot water run out through all of these cutworks, this is a sieve. Who knew? Look at that. It's made of brass. These are made in workshops. These are not made at home. And many kitchens that I've been in the mountains and throughout Greece, somebody has some version of this, because they love their pasta and their spaghettis and so forth. But this is a lid. And so when you want to pour off the spaghetti water, the boiling water, you just clamp this over the top of the pot and then lean it forward. You get your hand out of the way, you hold it over here and tip it, and all the water runs out into the drain. Very clever. The Greeks could come up with anything, but I found this to be a very interesting piece. And what is this all about? See this? You know what this is for? It's to keep the bugs out. Because when the wine is in it, wine can have a very pleasant fragrance, and the bugs know it. So the bugs would come up the inside and go down. And as soon as you found bugs in the wine, nobody wanted to drink it. So the women got clever, and they decided, well, let's embroider a pretty little piece to cover it so the bugs will stay out. How are you going to keep a little tiny lacy piece like this that will stay put? you put glass beads on it, and the beads are heavy. So that tricks the bugs from trying to get down in here to sip on the wine. Who knew? These village people always found ways to do clever things to make life a little easier. Relatively speaking, Greece is a small country, but in my many visits there, I have come to see enormous variety and creativity among the people there. And this has always fascinated me, and I love to travel and I love to talk to the locals. And so it looks so different from area to area, but that identifies where you're from. And if you were to go to a marketplace way up in northern Greece in an area called Pondos, you might see women walking around in something like this. This is this would be her good dress. And this girl is wearing one. And you can see all the shiny gold threads that are running through it. And there are fancy buttons, and here's part of her dowry that she's wearing around her neck. This is real money, and this would be what her father has given her before marriage so that she will have money to buy household goods. And look it up here. This would have been worn in her wedding. This is her wedding. We usually have a veil over the face. Sometimes they do. But this is the fancy headdress or the headpiece that is always worn by the girls from this area called Pondos. And so this has been loaned to us by a family who is from that area. And I love having it because it's unique. And it really speaks to the handwork that they did in that part of Greece. Greece had a royal family, and in the 1800s and the early 1900s, Athens was the capital, and they had a royal family that ruled the country. And the queen's name was Amalia, and blue was a very popular color with the Greeks. They always employed something in blue. And so this is an ensemble that I put together as close as I could come to royal designs. But I worked from a lot of photographs, and having been to Greece a number of times, I have visited the museums, and I've seen many of these things right up close. The costume that was done for her is called the Amalia costume. It's enormously popular, and throughout Greek communities throughout America, when they have a holiday, a festival of any kind, and they want the little girls to come out dressed in costumes, folk costumes, the costume of the Amalia is very popular. So I did a grown-up version, and this would have been a blue jacket, probably velvet, and then the skirt is done in a beautiful brocade. These are heavy, and I noticed that in the brocade weave, believe it or not, is the Greek cross. The Greek cross is a cross of balanced arms. It's not a cross like this, it's like that. And I see that repeated over and over in this weave. And so this would represent the queen when she would come out on the balcony to greet the peasants or greet the public. And so I came up with this because it resembles the photos and the drawings that I have seen in the books. It's called the Amalia. This costume is from the island of Rhodes. Rhodes is a very large island. It has its own local government, and they have a wonderful climate there. It's a very popular destination. And this is the island costume. And I've seen these in museums, and it's a pinafore over a white dress. And then they love the sashes. These are woven on local looms. Sometimes the bride weaves her own, but usually in a town you will have one or two women who have a loom, and they do the weaving. And I have a few pieces in my collection that I bought from a woman in my husband's village who, in her 90s, she still had a large loom, and she would weave these beautiful pieces of fabric. So this is just a sash tie for this young woman here. And but we want to show you something. This is what she would wear for footwear. Do you see this boot? Now, why in the world would a girl on an island need a boot? Well, Rhodes is famous for having snakes. And when you go out in the garden to harvest the whatever you're growing, beans or carrots or whatever you're growing, you got to watch out for some snakes. And it's widely known there. And so to protect your ankles, you might disturb a snake as you're walking through the garden. You sure don't want a snake bite. So this is part of the formal costume of the island of Rhodes. And so this boot represents um, protection against snake bites. We've been viewing some of the most beautiful wedding costumes that are seen all through the museums that are preserving the history of Greece. It's a very small country, but it has enormous variety and a lot of influences through antiquity. And so we see those influences sort of float to the top with each century that goes by. Now, the women really did well because on the wedding costumes in the various regions, they're very creative. Alas, for the men, we have here, this fellow would be a Cretan. Now, he's wearing a headpiece that is made out of netting and has little pieces of netting hanging over. I can't remember what it's called, but you see Cretan men walking around wearing these. There's another one over there. And very common. You see them sitting in coffee shops, and they've got these little nets on with the little things hanging down. So we have inherited a few of those that people donated to the collection. So I put them here so I could talk about it. He is wearing a beautiful vest, and this is a man's wedding costume from Crete. Now, the pants are somewhat laughable to people in America today because they look like there's something wrong because they don't fit like tailored trousers. These are called vrakas. So here's a guy with his vraka, and here's another one, and here's another one, and you can see how they're real pouchy looking. It's a throwback to the times when the Muslim faith was dominant in that part of the world, and this is what Muslim men wear. These men were not necessarily Muslims in their belief, but because the empire had that as a style for men, all the men wore a version of the vraka. This jacket is from a fustanella. The fustanella is the ceremonial jacket that was worn by the king. And then all of the men throughout the empire wanted to wear a version of that to show their loyalty to their leader. And there are workshops that specialize in making these. These are either velvet or they are heavy wool, and they have a lot of really pretty banded embroidery in gold. And this one is Cretan. Well, this one is more Peloponnesian, I'm sorry. Okay, we're moving over here. This is one of the earliest pieces that I have done. This is a woman's wedding outfit, and this is from northern Greece. Northern Greece has a colder climate, and so they do a lot of their costume work in wool. And this is a wool apron, and it has embroidery patterns on it that are very popular with Greek weavers. And this is a wedding costume. So her underdress is white, heavy cotton, and then her overdress is this pinafore, because the sleeve is a part of the underdress. Something to say about these aprons: they are woven, they have a pattern that is repeated, and of course her dowry, the coins, are attached to her apron. But what is this business up here? Can you figure it out? She wants to be a mother someday, and that's the destiny of all young women who are getting married, is that they will become a wife, a bride, of course, and that she will bear children. And this is her one good dress, so she can wear it throughout life. But what if she starts out having her babies, and maybe she's got 3 babies in a row, and how is she going to feed them? Well, they breastfed them, and these openings here are to facilitate breastfeeding. And since she was a young mother, maybe several times in her life, this was her good wedding dress at marriage. But then later in life, it is the dress she wore when she was breastfeeding her babies. And so I can just put my fingers right through there because this is where she would expose her breast to feed her babies. Pretty clever, don't you think? This is a real apron, and it was given to me as a subject piece to use in the collection. And the reason I like it so much is because it's so authentic. Very few people in the villages had their own loom, and those that did, it was a very primitive piece to weave on. This was made by someone in a village and was given to me by a relative. This is what that individual had woven on her loom, and the loom was only that wide, so she did two long strips and then sewed them together so it created a long apron. It's very heavy, very scratchy, but this is the roughness of the wool that they had. Many did not have refined wool. And so this was probably worn by someone. It was given to me as a relative who treasured it because it was made by her relative who wove it. This is from the island of Corfu. We call the island Kerkyra. It used to be under the domination of Greece, and then for a while it was owned by Italy, and now it's Greek again. And they had a very Venetian look. That's why you see all the flowers on the headdress and the lovely embroideries and a lot of silks and beautiful, beautiful costumes because they had the influence of who that island was owned by Italy for way over 100 years. So when you visit Kerkyra or Corfu, you hear the men playing local songs, and they're singing Italian as they go around in the restaurants and they entertain us. And so we see the evidence of the softness of the look of the floral headdresses that was very popular with the Italians for over 100 years. And so when that island belonged to Greece, they still continued with this look of really lovely lace work and crochet work. And it's a warmer climate, so they wear a lot of silk and cotton, very wearable garments. They're lovely. One of the things that interests me so much about this collection is the enormous variety of needlework and styles of costumes and the livability. Some of these things are very complicated and very heavy, but there's a beauty in all of these, and it makes you wonder, why did this island look so different from that island? Or why did the mountain region dress so differently from the people on the plains? Because every group had what they defined as pretty or as speaking to them. Something about the design that is unique to that little group of women who embroider a certain way. You will only see that repeated in that region. And that's why it's interesting to travel through a small country like Greece. I have really enjoyed riding along, and we'll go through small towns and we'll go to other cities. And right away, you'll see women in the marketplace standing around in their local costume. And there might only be 50 people that dress like that, but it's unique to that town or that area. And it has always interested me into how do these things develop? Who thought what was pretty? Who knew what was the adornments that would be necessary for that daughter to get married and bespeak the island that she's from because of the way the jewelry is made. And so all of these things fit. And yet on a small country like Greece, the variety, as you have seen, is enormous. So we'll talk a little bit about some handwork. This is a crochet work, and it's two lovebirds that are touching their beaks. Who knew how in the world you would start just simply crocheting, because it's just knot tying is what crocheting is. And the woman that made this, she came up with this idea and she crocheted. It's a little placemat. So it's two little lovebirds and their beaks are touching each other. I've never seen anything quite like it, but I have lots of examples of needlework that has been done or designs put on costumes by the locals. Today, after everybody comes to America, we dress like Americans. But I treasure these things because they were done from the loving hands of the people of Greece. This is from the island of Chios, and she is from Chios. And these were apron. This was an apron, and some of the embroidered bands on the sleeves were found at her mother's house. They had been in storage. So her mother pulled these things out of storage, and they gave them to me and asked if I could pull it together. So I created what was missing, like the underdress, but all the rest of it, the fancy sleeves and this trim down here and the apron and the headdress, all of that is from Chios. And here is a woman in the museum wearing the very same look. It's a little faded, you can't tell, but it's this kind of this headdress, which is unique to the people of Chios. This is one of my favorite pieces that came into our ownership as a gift from one of our parishioners. She did this, it's needlepoint, counted cross stitch. It's a line of girls folk dancing. It's a village scene. And she must have been, when I knew her, she was in her 90s. She had worked on this for a long time. I'm not sure. She said she was young when she did this. It's an amazing work because there's no printed piece behind it that you embroidered. It's counted cross stitch. So she had the picture sitting here on a stand, and she would count the little squares as she was doing each apron or each face or each headdress by counting the cross stitches. It's an amazing work. And I was so pleased that she left it to the church. So we have had it under glass and framed carefully so that it cannot deteriorate. But it's just rows of girls Greek dancing at a wedding. And I love the piece. It's huge. You don't see these except in good museums. You can just see how different the aprons are. These are islanders, I'm sure. So beautiful. In this collection, we have reached all the way from Asia Minor to modern-day America, and we see how some costumes have survived through the years. The modern ones, of course, are made from modern fabrics, but we do like our dance groups to wear costumes that imitate what their ancestors wore when they were young women and young men living in Greece. So we have a nice collection of how they dressed at that time. I have to say that for a country as small as Greece, it has enormous variety from island to island, from mountain to plain, from every place you can think of that has the stamp of Greece. The locals had a certain identity, and it showed in the way they dressed and designed. This is considered the look of Asia Minor. Asia Minor, of course, was originally part of one of the Greek empires. And so you see this opulent, these brocades are very, very beautiful. And there are embroidered pieces put on top of the brocade. This costume has 4 layers. Believe it or not, underneath all this, she's wearing puffy pants. And then there is a cotton dress that covers all over the body and has long sleeves. Over the top of that is a silky coat. And these are the odd sleeves on the silk coat. And over the top of that is this heavy brocade piece. And it's voluminous. If we could pull her out, I could spread it out and you could see how heavy this is. I only had pictures to look at to come up with an idea what it should look like. I've read numerous books on the costumes of women of the Middle or Near East, and this one really captured my heart. And one day when I was shopping at a Hobby Lobby, I think is where it was, and I was looking at fabrics they had, and this piece was on a winder, and I thought, oh my goodness, that's straight out of the Middle East. This is lovely. What could I do with that? So I bought 6 yards, It was not cheap, but I was determined that I wanted one piece that really looked like the real thing. And I went through my books and I came up with this particular outfit, which would have been worn by royalty. So this girl was really going to cash in. This would be money her father was endowing to her, part of her dowry, so that when she got married, there'd be plenty of money to buy stuff. And then this would be the unusual hat with the coins displayed. So there are no patterns for these, so I had to create my own patterns. It was quite a work, but I'm pleased with it. The coat, if you could see her out here, the coat is quite wide. It spreads way out. So I wanted to finish this so we could see the creativity of people from the Near East or the Middle East, mostly from the kingdoms of Greece and that surrounding area. So this was, I just finished that just a few years ago, so I have moved it in here so we can use it as part of the exhibit. This is up in northern Greece. It's outside of Thessaloniki, and if you go across toward Asia Minor, this would be the look. I have two pictures of girls wearing that kind of a look. The coat does not close. It's a pretty tunic, and it's quite long, and it covers her fancy dress, which would be brocade. This would not be a girl from a poor family. This is a very expensive outfit, and her father was probably a wealthy landowner, or we don't know. But in that part of the world, if you see things like this, it means that they were holding off until it was time to marry the girl. They're going to go all out and buy the best fabric and have the most beautiful designers and embroiderers to come up with this look. When putting together a collection like this, it becomes difficult to find what pieces are appropriate for it and how old are these pieces and who designed them and who wore them. And it's hard to get it nailed down with accuracy because very few books have been written on this. You kind of have to know somebody in a family who had a tailor who specialized in maybe making the vraka. This is the man's pouchy pants, just for laughs, okay? One leg came out here, okay? And his other leg came out over here. And all of the rest hangs between his legs. Who designed that? God only knows. I don't know, but it always gets a chuckle because people look at it and think it's part of a tablecloth. I said, no, it's a man's trousers. But this is part of the interesting part of doing research like this, because you find things that you didn't know existed. And then when you discover something like this, who designed it and how long have they been wearing it? Do they still wear it? You know what? They do. In many of the Muslim countries, they still wear the vraka. The Greeks were required to wear it when they were under the domination of the early Turkish people. And so over time, as Greece developed its own society, its own governance, and so forth, they abandoned this look. So we have some that are still surviving, but we use them as an example so we can understand the education of how different groups decided what was beautiful, how would you dress when you went out in public, and where do you go to make one of these. So nothing was made in factories. Everything was done by specialists, designers and embroiderers and tailors. Aprons and things like that were usually done at home. The women did the simple things, and the scarves. But the garments that adorned the body were done usually in specialty shops. This is a special holy cloth, and it is only used during Holy Week and when we are mourning the death of our Lord and his burial. This was done somewhere in the Middle East. We know very little about it. I discovered it wadded up under a staircase in a storage area at the old church. I don't know, well, it came from the Middle East, we know that, and we know it's Christian because the embroidery around it speaks about the men who went to visit the body of Christ. And this is from scripture. And these are the mourners. There's his mother, and then some of his very closest people who were with him throughout his life and his ministry. And I see some angels there, and I see some ancient, probably theologians. We don't know too much about it, but we do know that the verse that goes around it is the one that is read at the time of his burial and our sorrow. We found it wadded up in a box somewhere, and I saw right away that it was something we need to preserve. So one of our parishioners designed this nice glass case, and I'm glad, so we can look at it and enjoy it, but we don't know much about it. But it is what is used at the burial of our Lord. This piece is especially precious to me because it was donated to this collection on loan. It's a wedding vest, and the embroidery on this is unbelievable. The tiny work of all of this cording, and a cord is only like that big, and they would go round and round and do these beautiful, intricate designs. And this was worn by the grandfather of one of our parishioners. So Tiri, this was his grandfather's vest that was worn. And then there were other components that were loaned for this collection. If we didn't have the real thing to see it, I wouldn't have any idea what they really did look like. Because the only place we have to go to look for fabric would be maybe as a big general store or a Sears or a Hobby Lobby or something like that, where you can buy some of the components. But to find books with pictures and front and back views and where these things were worn, and was it embroidered or was it woven, I had to learn all that from the books. And I'm very grateful for that, because these books are rare. It's not easy to find them because there's not a big interest in them. But I'm very grateful that God gave me the understanding of this, because it's part of our history. This is our 52nd Greek festival. It's hard to believe that it's half a century since we've been putting on a wonderful ethnic festival in Columbus. And we started with seeing how important it was as we would hear the men playing the bouzouki and we'd hear the music. Those of us who had visited Greece remember seeing all the girls and the young men doing line dancing. And we thought that was such a wholesome way to celebrate. And of course, with the beautiful aprons that girls could wear, it would show off the embroidery, or it would show off the costume from the head scarf all the way down to the shoes. And we developed a love for this, and we had sign-ups every year for young people who wanted to join the dance line. And so I became the designer of costumes. Well, all I had to work from were many of the books that I have and some photography. And so I would hit the fabric stores early in the year to start loading up on which fabrics and which ribbons and trims I'm going to need. But we didn't know how many people are going to sign up. It's only going to be 5 dancers, or going to be 25 dancers. So the numbers have grown. And in my research, I did discover that it would be impossible for me to make heavy woven brocade jackets. That was just way too involving and too expensive. And so I looked through my books, and I saw that there were some areas, especially in the islands, where the girls were performing in little dance lines. And they had costumes that I knew I could duplicate. So I started out, and we did very simple copies. And as the years have gone by, we've advanced it more, and they're a little more complicated. But sometimes we have as many as 25 girls in a line, don't we? And so to make 25 outfits was pretty much a high calling. But I did find other women in the community who could sew. And so I would provide them with the fabric and a finished costume so they could copy it. So that has grown, and now each year we have fully costumed dancers. And it is really a crowd pleaser. And they dance their hearts out, and we love to watch them. and it brings them close to their heritage. And the audience goes wild. They applaud and they cheer and so forth, which we love. And so this little girl represents a place called Mani, and it's in the southern Peloponnese, and it's not very complicated, but they had these interesting little pillbox hats and then a bright yellow scarf over the top. I thought, I can do that. And then as I went more and more into the development of the layers, I saw, well, with the blouse, I'll buy an ordinary white blouse, and then I can put the adornments on the cuffs or around the neckline or so forth. Pretty soon I was able to come up with something that was pretty decent. So we now have arrived at a certain look for the different ages of our dance line. We have quite a few dancers, from the little kids all the way up to our seniors. And so this represents an area in southern Peloponnese called Mani. And the yellow headscarves are a real crowd pleaser because when the line comes out, everybody stops and watches the dance line. We have young men who also perform, and they wear vests and dark trousers and then a bright red sash with fringe hanging down, very much like the pictures that I have seen on my trips. And so that's the best we can do in Columbus, Ohio, to come up with something that gives us an image of what it was like for our forebears who came from the old world and have settled in Columbus. Putting together an exhibit like this has been quite a mountain to climb. I grew up as a farm girl in southern Ohio. I knew nothing about other countries, but we did do square dancing in southern Ohio. So we had square dance costumes, and we had to make our own because we were 4-H club girls and we had learned how to sew. In my travels with my husband to his home country of Greece, I became fascinated by what was in the museums there, because the girls in Greece were pretty much dressing like American girls, so you didn't see women walking around in these lovely things. But they are in museums, and there have been books written about it, but not very many. I love to sew, and I know something about fabric and what holds up well, and it became just something that I wanted to do, was to see something that imitated the collections that I used to see in the museums in Greece. We have a lot of people in Columbus, Ohio, who are of Greek extraction, and I think it's important for us to learn something about the heritage that we brought with us. When they arrived from Greece, they became Americans pretty quickly. And as time has gone by, we tend to look back. What was it like for our grandparents or their parents? Or if we made a visit to Greece and we saw things that were in the villages that we knew needed to be preserved and saved. And so my interest grew even more, and the collection began to grow. I kept a lot of these in my private home, but there are too many of them. So I began to use this room, which had been designed as a library, but wasn't used much. So I asked the parish council if I could use this room as an exhibition room, and I'll get some mannequins and I will dress them, and then we'll have something educational for our children to learn. They gave me that permission, for which I'm eternally grateful, because I don't know what I would do with all these things now. I surely can't keep them at my house. I thank you for your interest in this, and I hope that something I have shown you has been educational. And do feel free to come and visit us during our festival. The exhibit will be open, and we'll be glad to share it with you. I thank my Heavenly Father for guiding me through this and for giving me the gift of knowing how to sew. Who knew when I was a girl on the farm that I would amass something like this? But it's very precious to me, and I hope that it's interesting to you. I want to thank all of the people who have stood beside me and given me encouragement through this effort. God bless you.